The Esperance region is home to some of the oldest and most unique historical buildings in Western Australia. These buildings tell of the dramatic change that the colonial period brought to the land. Stories of community and conflict, tragedy and hope, and stories of survival in some of the most unlikely places. Australia's history is full of stories of rebels and dreamers who achieved the seemingly impossible. This is one of these stories. A young German running from the law and determined to make a life for himself, found in Nanambinia a place to call home. This incredibly isolated outpost became an oasis of hospitality, filled with children, beautiful gardens, and an amazing assortment of livestock. Through sweat and tears, heartache and joy, the Dimer family created a beautiful home at Nanambinia that is still standing strong today. Heinrich Dimer was born on the 15th of February 1861 in Weisloch, West Germany, to parents Joseph and Susanna. He was one of 6 children. His father was a butcher, and Heinrich learnt the trade at a young age. In 1879, at the age of 18, he emigrated to the United States of America. There he worked as a butcher in the New York abattoir. Wanting a change, he went to Massachusetts and signed on as a crew member on a whaling ship called the Platina in 1882. Whaling at the time was important for supplying the oil used in lamps and for machine lubrication, and the industry was in full swing. Whaling and sealing off the south coast of Western Australia began in the 1820s, with some crews establishing camps on the islands along the coast. By the 1880s, the industry was booming, and whaling ships of many different nationalities stopped in at Albany for supplies, including the Platina on several occasions. Heinrich liked the look of the town, and after 2 years on the ship, doing back-breaking work in poor conditions, he decided to jump ship. In the early hours of the 11th of June 1884, he jumped from the ship and swam the 3 miles to shore. He'd wrapped his small bundle of personal belongings in oilcloth and tied the bundle to the top of his head. Heinrich and a fellow deserter met a man named Campbell Taylor on a beach east of Albany. A chance meeting that impacted the course of his life. Warrants were issued for their arrests, and as there were severe penalties for ship jumpers at the time, Campbell helped them to hide in a cave on Bald Island. After the search was called off, he took them to his property called Dimer Station, to the east of Esperance Bay, to work for him. In 1885, after a year of working for Campbell, Heinrich went to work for another one of the early European settlers in the district, John Paul Brooks, at Nanambinia Station. His job was to shepherd the Brookses' sheep. As there were no fences on the properties at the time, shepherds would take the sheep to surrounding food and water sources, watching out for poison plants and dingoes. Heinrich found he had spare time in the evenings, so he started writing his life story by the light of a slush lamp, an old jam tin filled with mutton fat and a piece of flannel put in the middle as a wick. He'd written 400 pages of his story before tragedy struck. When returning to his camp one night, he found the entire tent had burnt to the ground, with all his belongings inside. He never tried to write his life story again, leaving that task to his son Karl, who much later wrote the family's story in a book called Elsewhere Fine. Heinrich was to be paid £40 per year by John Paul, which he supplemented by shooting kangaroos and selling their skins. After 3 years of this work, he decided to go out on his own. John Paul didn't have the money to pay his wages for the 3 years' work, so Heinrich received 40 ewes and 2 rams instead. He got some Aboriginal people to shepherd his sheep while he went kangaroo hunting. During this time, he met a Naju woman called Belang, and the two of them had a daughter, Catherine, in 1889, and a son named Jacob in 1891. Along with Campbell Taylor and the Brooks family, the Ponton brothers and John Sharp were some of the earliest European arrivals in the district. Stephen and William Ponton came to Australia from England as convicts in 1859, and after they were given conditional pardons, Stephen married Anne Ryan. Stephen and Anne had 2 children, Will and Ellen. But sadly, Anne died while they were still young. The brothers came to the Cape Arid region in 1873, working in partnership with Scottish immigrant John Sharp. They took up leases at Point Malcolm and Pine Hill, beginning what would become a vast pastoral estate encompassing many thousands of acres of land from the coast to Nanambinia Station. They would become Heinrich's friends and neighbours. In 1890, Heinrich met a woman called Topsy Whitehand. Topsy was the daughter of a Nyungar woman called Anna Whitehand and a European man, believed by many to be William Ponton, one of the Ponton brothers. The couple also had 2 sons, Tommy Tucker and Lorenzo or Lawrence Ponton. An interview with Thomas Dimer, one of Henry and Topsy Dimer's sons, notes that his grandfather was Bill Ponton, but you're not supposed to mention it. This connection is acknowledged by many of the Aboriginal people in the region, many of whom can track their own ancestry to Topsy, Tommy or Lorenzo, but is disputed by some of the descendants of the Pontons, who believe that Topsy's father was a shepherd called William Leno, as is recorded on her death record. Without conclusive proof either way, the truth will likely now remain buried in the past. Heinrich and Topsy began a relationship, moving back to Linburn Station to work for Campbell Taylor. In August 1894, they had their first child, Harry Keith. In 1896, Heinrich got a government contract to cart telegraph poles from Israelite Bay to the new section of telegraph line, which was being built further inland. When the new Israelite Bay telegraph station was completed that same year, the couple rented the old weatherboard station building, which would have been very comfortable for the couple who were used to living in tents. Here their second child, Bertha, was born in December 1897. The same year, Heinrich became a naturalised British subject, 13 years after his desertion from the Platina, and from this time on he anglicised his name to Henry. Henry and Topsy were married at Israelite Bay in May 1899 by the Reverend Alfred Burton, who'd made the 240-kilometre trip from Esperance for the occasion. Following his marriage, Henry was granted a residential land lease at Israelite Bay. At this time, there was a small community living there, including the Cook family and the workers at the telegraph station. Henry built a 2-bedroom limestone cottage with a kitchen, completing it by the time his third child, Hetty Annie, known as Annie, was born in May 1901. The Dimer family used this house for many years as their base on the coast, even after they'd moved further inland. On the lease application, Henry listed his occupation as kangaroo hunter, and he made much of his income this way. But he was quick to take advantage of any business opportunity, carting goods, breeding horses for sale, and building stone houses and shearing sheds for other settlers. In February of 1902, Henry applied for a lease of 26,000 acres inland from Israelite Bay, near the Brooks family's Nanambinia Station. According to Carl Dimer's account, the property was named after the Aboriginal word for a wattle tree that grows in the area, Nanu, and the suffix binya, which means something small. Nanambinia was changed or mispronounced to become Nanambinia. Henry began building a house on the property in 1903, starting out with a 1-bedroom stone cottage with a kitchen and a corrugated iron roof. Before the house was finished, their 4th child, Thomas, was born in 1903. Over time, the family gradually added to the house until it became a substantial 5-bedroom homestead with a kitchen, dining room, storeroom, wash house, and an underground cement tank for collecting water. They added to their lease holdings over the years, and by the 1930s they had over 500,000 acres. The couple had more children, with Fred, born in 1905, Walter in 1908, Sydney in 1911, Carl in 1913, and Barney in 1915. They also had 3 babies who were either stillborn or died soon after birth. As soon as the children were old enough, all 9 of them were expected to work on the station. As Carl noted in Elsewhere Fine, it was always said that there were no children in the Dimer family, only workers. The children were involved in all aspects of station life, with the girls, Bertha and Annie, working just as hard as the boys. As well as taking rations to the shepherds, checking water and stock and working in the garden, Bertha kept milking cows, so the family had their own milk, cream and butter. Jake Dimer is the grandson of Carl Dimer, author of Elsewhere Fine. He spent a lot of time with his grandparents growing up and has a special affinity with this land that his ancestors put their heart and soul into.
I mean, I enjoy coming here, and I guess it's just my connection with my grandparents in a way. I feel comfortable being here and knowing and listening to the stories and the yarns from the other fellas up the road there. They've always got an interesting story to tell. I spent a lot of time with them as a young fella in Kalgoorlie. A lot of good memories. I spent hours in the shed building stuff and fixing stuff with him, and just kept him busy, I guess, and kept me sort of entertained. Catching butterflies in the backyard. 2 cents each I used to get for a butterfly because they were in the garden, the white ones. He was good. Sort of blunt, not sort of too excited sort of a fellow.
Nanambinia is located on the traditional lands of the Naju people, and many of them lived at Nanambinia, where they worked as shepherds, including Henry's son Jacob from his relationship with Balang. In Elsewhere Fine, Carl Dimer listed a number of the Aboriginal shepherds and stated, "I would have trusted my life with any one of those Aboriginal shepherds." Although Topsy was a Nyungar woman, most of the Dimer children did not recognise their Aboriginal heritage, possibly due to the threat of the children being taken away under the policies of the Chief Protector of Aborigines that led to the stolen generation. Aboriginal people at that time also faced a range of restrictions, such as not being allowed to purchase or drink alcohol, not being allowed into restricted areas, which could include whole towns, and having to get permission from the Native Welfare Commission to get married. Danny Graham is a Naju elder who has lived and worked in this area his whole life.
Bananya, that's the bloodline that runs through me, through my father and my dad's mum. My dad's tribe is a Marlborough, and he worked all around. He worked Fraser's Range, Southern Hills, and Midura, Cockabetty, Rawlinna. That's where I grew up, at Rawlinna. If they wanted to go to Northern, they had to get a permit to walk to Northern. And if they wanted to come down to Esperance, they had to get a special paper, the Native Welfare. How many days you come down, how many days to go back, how long you're stopping there. They keep an eye on them like being in the zoo. You know, just treating Aboriginal people like animals. They wasn't even allowed to go to school. They wasn't even allowed to go in the shop. Policemen come along and say, "What are you doing here? Get back where you belong. Don't hang around town, otherwise we'll lock you up."
In Esperance, Aboriginal people were not permitted to go past the colour line at Hannett Point, where the current-day jetty is located. Annie Dimer did identify with her Aboriginal heritage and chose to live more traditional ways of life than her siblings did. She was notably very good at tracking and hunting, and frequently ate bush tucker. She later married an Aboriginal man, William or Bill Tucker.
But they were hard workers. They had black Dimers there working and white Dimers, but the white Dimers didn't recognise the black Dimers. They yarn and talk out there, no worries. When they go into town Northern, they duck. The white ones, they duck their own cousins, aunties, nephews, nieces. Black people had to stay by themselves, and the white people had to stay by themselves.
As well as running sheep, Henry also attempted to grow crops at Nanambinia with very mixed results. Much of the land was too salty for crops, but after some experimentation, Henry worked out which paddocks he could use to grow wheat, oats, or lucerne for hay. He was very fond of gardening and planted many fruit trees, grapevines, and big vegetable gardens. He continued with his carting business, working with a man named George Abbott, and in 1905, the partners purchased some camels for the business. During this time, many of the pastoralists were beginning to put in fences as a deterrent against dingoes and rabbits, which were becoming a big problem. The camels were used for carting the heavy rolls of fencing wire, as well as goods for the telegraph line workers and other station owners. In around 1910, Henry got a contract to cart cats, as the government was trying various methods to deal with the rabbit problem. They were caught in Albany and Perth, and then shipped to Israelite Bay, where Henry carted them inland and let them go. He stated that some of the cats were in such poor condition that they wouldn't be able to catch a mouse, let alone a rabbit. Carl noted that the cats found it much easier to catch and eat lizards and birds. There used to be a lot of robin redbreasts and willy wagtails around Nanambinia, but I haven't seen these around for years. Life didn't change very much on the station at the outbreak of the First World War. During the war, the Australian government sent many German people who were living in the country to internment camps. In Elsewhere Fine, Carl records that some police officers came to arrest Henry, but he told them, "You touch me, and you touch the American flag. I'm a naturalised American citizen." In 1917, Topsy became very sick. Henry was shepherding sheep far away, and someone was sent for him. A doctor came from Norseman, which would have been a difficult trip on very rough roads. Despite this, Topsy continued to worsen, with a high temperature and a weak pulse. On the 30th of August 1918, Topsy died at just 42 years old. She was buried the next day at Nanambinia. According to Henry's diaries and Carl's account in Elsewhere Fine, she was a kind and thoughtful mother, a hard worker, and a good host and cook. Her youngest child, Barney, was 3 when she died, and Carl was only 5 years old. He later wrote, "I only wish I'd been old enough to really know my mother. I'm sure I lost someone I would have loved dearly in person, just as much as I love her in my thoughts." Carl also noted that Topsy was camera shy, and there are very few photographs of her.
Been coming out probably since 2013, more regularly, a few times a year. Just have a look around and look at the old sites and make sure it's all still here, I guess. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here I don't know about yet. I was too young.
Jake was only young when his granddad Carl died, many years after his mother Topsy.
Mum took me up to Kalgoorlie and there was a viewing there. Yeah, I saw him there in the coffin. Yeah, that was pretty tough for me.
As time went on, the family took any opportunity to socialise, frequently visiting the Trots at Buanya, 11 kilometres away, and the Brooks family at Balbinia. Harry was a keen tennis player and would often ride his bicycle to Israelite Bay, a distance of 128 kilometres, for the weekend to play tennis. He would also frequently ride to tennis matches at Balladonia, 37 kilometres away. The family also had horses, donkeys, mules, camels and motorbikes for transport, and in 1926 they bought their first motor car, a Model T Ford, which was called Daisy. Many an evening was spent around an organ, which Bertha and Annie could both play, so the family would often gather to sing together. Carl describes one evening socialising with their neighbours, the Choppins. On Sunday, Choppin and his family arrived, and we played tennis for most of the day. They had the evening meal with us, and then we got out the old gramophone, cleared the table and chairs out of the dining room, and danced until midnight or later, with Mrs. Choppin, Nell and Billy. I can remember Dad, in his 60s, teaching Billy, the youngest daughter, how to do the polka and the schottisch. Over the years, the Dimer children drifted away from Nanambinia, working on other stations in the district, opening up a butcher's shop in Norseman, running a legal bookmaking operation at the races, working as doggers or in the mining industry, and in various other jobs. Some of the Dimers formed a shearing team and travelled to shear at other stations. Several of them married and had children. Norman Tyndale, a prominent Australian anthropologist who visited this region on one of his ethnographic expeditions in the 1930s, wrote about Bertha and the rest of the siblings. Bertha is eccentric, wears cowboy clothes and rides around Norseman on flash horses. All the steady people don't drink as a rule, are permitted entrance to bars and hotels, relatively wealthy. Then, in late 1936, Henry Dimer became sick. He sent Annie a telegram to ask if she would come to Nanambinia, and she and her family did so. Henry got worse, and after a couple of weeks, Annie's husband Bill took him to Kalgoorlie, where he was diagnosed with pneumonia. A week later, on the 7th of December 1936, Henry died in hospital at the age of 75. Carl wrote of his father, "Dad was a hard man in a lot of ways, but he did not expect you to do anything he could not do or would not have done himself. I had a great respect, admiration and love for my father." At the time of his death, Henry was a well-regarded patriarch in the district who'd managed to establish a productive station in such a barren area. A newspaper article written before his death wrote, "Some 35 miles along this rather lonely track is the homestead of Nanambinia, with its stockyards, stables, woolshed and other signs of long occupation. A fine dam with a capacity of 500,000 gallons explains the presence of grapevines, fruit trees, oat and lucerne crops, and a remarkable vegetable patch. The soil in this country is certainly rich, but water is generally scarce. Merino and Shropshire sheep flocks yield annually some 50 bales of wool. There is a fine herd of some 600 cattle, about 100 horses, and a like number of camels, besides scores of donkeys and mules. Excessive distance from markets constitutes a serious drawback, but there are hard workers with big hearts at Nanambinia. Following Henry's death, arrangements were made to divide the various landholdings between the children, who were also getting older and less able to carry out the hard work that made the station viable. In the late 1950s, Bertha bought out shares of the other family members, and she ran the station for many years, with some Aboriginal workers and regular help from Carl and Sid, battling the rabbits, dingoes and foxes, as well as the dry seasons and the increasing cost of rates. Danny Graham worked as the station manager for Bertha during this tough time.
Barney Dimer, Sid Dimer, Carl Dimer, old Bertha Dimer. I know all them Dimer breeds. There's all them up there. She was a strong woman, that one. Half English broken talk, half Marlborough. She went to Northern looking for a station manager because she wanted to go down to Port Malcolm for a break, but she couldn't find anybody. She couldn't get a white person to come out and manage the station. But old Bertha, she's come down and had a good day and hello and that. Hey, Wendy being a boy, do you want to come out to Nanambinia and work for me? Manage my station while I go away. I want you to put shearing through. I said, oh, that's good. Now the sheep is all scattered, all the fences down, we had to go and bring the sheep in. And all we had was one push bike and one Holden ute. And if we're going along, and the sheep going this way here, out with the Shanghai. Single shot, double prong, cloud of dust, the sheep jump back, another one hit the tree, bang, they jump. And if they go back this way too far, bang. But we went and got them all in, chucked them in the trailer. When it's full, take the sheep back to the paddock. Then we went back, after we got all the sheep in this area, we went to the other place. We got all the sheep within the range of Nanambinia Station. That old lady, she was a smart old lady, got more sheep than what she counted. And she had an old black and white ambulance, still had the sign on. It comes from Northern ambulance, it was still written on there. She had a bed made up in there.
Bertha died in 1970 from lung cancer. By this time, Jacob, Fred, Walter and Sid had also died. Bertha left the property to Carl, who continued to run Nanambinia on his own, with occasional help from some of his children and brothers. He struggled through more years of drought and fluctuating sheep and wheat prices, but by the time Carl was in his 60s, he was finding the work difficult and the station barely viable. He and his family were living in Kalgoorlie and travelling frequently to the station. With land rents increasing, he began to discuss selling the station with his wife Iris, and in 1980, the station lease, all the buildings and stock were sold to John and Doreen Peckham for just $27,000. In 1989, Carl published Elsewhere Fine, his book about the Dimer family, which drew a lot of information from his father's diaries. The title of the book is a reference to the weather at Nanambinia, where it rained so infrequently that when the weather was announced on TV, while there might have been storms or showers in some places, Nanambinia was elsewhere fine.
It's obviously a good book. People like the history, and trying to find a copy is near on impossible. My uncle's got the original script but can't be located. Yeah, I think the idea of getting a few 1,000 prints made would be a good thing to do, but there is quite an expense to do it because the scanning's expensive. I think the 1,000's obviously an economical number because it's sort of what Grandad printed originally, so it might be worth doing. Yeah, I'd want it to be the same as what this one is, and I'll work on that over the next few months and hopefully I'll get something happening.
Nanambinia is still part of a working pastoral station. While all of Henry and Topsy Dimer's children have now died, many of their descendants still live in the area. From his beginnings as a ship jumper and nomadic worker, Henry Dimer managed to build a great life for himself and his family in a place that is still today incredibly isolated and harsh. Through hard work and his ability to build relationships with those around him, Henry achieved the near impossible, creating an oasis in the desert and leaving a lasting legacy for the future.